Good evening. It's the start of a new week. You're watching The Big Story, where we discuss the hottest topics of the day. I'm Olivia Quay, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. Now, due to a weakened outlook after the coronavirus outbreak, the Ministry of Trade and Industry today downgraded its economic growth forecast to between minus 0.5 and 1.5%, this indicating a possible recession. For Trade and Industry, Gabriel Lim, said the last time Singapore suffered a recession was in 2001, when the full-year GDP contracted by about 1%. But this time, the ministry estimates GDP growth to come in at about 0.5%, which is the midpoint of the forecast range. To break this all down, I'm joined by Poon Chian Hui, Deputy Business Editor at the Straits Times. Chian Hui, thanks so much for joining us. Now, first of all, what are the main contributing factors to this downgrade? Is it primarily because of the coronavirus outbreak?
I would think so, yes. Back in November, the ministry actually released its forecast for 2020. However, it was a notch higher at 0.5 to 2.5%. That was before the virus outbreak took hold. So ever since then, I believe that it's because markets such as China and affected economies would see a dampened demand. And therefore, today, it resulted in the downgrading of the GDP forecast.
I see.
However, I think on the other hand, we continue to see some challenges from the global economy. So US-China trade relations still remain uncertain, and as well as the Middle East conflict.
Right. So which sectors do you think would be the worst hit by the weaker by the weaker growth outlook?
So far, I would think that the immediate sectors would be on three fronts. The first front would be what we call the outward-oriented sectors. So this would mean your manufacturing industries and wholesale trade industries who export goods out of Singapore. They have been affected because the factories in China have closed for a prolonged period, and the workers are also not returning back to work. The second part would be the tourism industry. Because of the drop in arrivals to Singapore, hotels, travel agents, they have all been hit, and therefore, there's a lot of repercussions in the market because it leads to the third factor, which is domestic consumption. People are afraid to go out and do shopping or dine. So in the end, our retail and F&B would also be affected by this situation.
Well, there is a silver lining, if you can call it that, because according to MTI's Permanent Secretary, Gabriel Lim, he said there are pockets of relative strength in the Singapore economy, like the construction sector and the information and communication sector as well. So why do you think these sectors are more resilient?
For construction, it actually had a rebound that was can be traced back to 2018, where there's a sort of fresh pipeline of projects, and they are currently underway, therefore generating continued activity in the construction sector up to now. As for the Infocom industry, efforts in digitalization has also led to a greater demand in IT capabilities. So fueling, the expertise in this area continue to gain income as well.
Right. Any other sectors you can identify that, would not be so badly affected?
I believe currently real estate has not really seen a big hit on, in fact. But it's really hard to say because we have also had reports that it could affect show flats attendance down the line.
Right, okay. Well, Mr. Lim also threw back to the SARS outbreak of 2003 when the economy shrank by 0.3% in the second quarter, but growth bounced back to record a 5.3% expansion in Q3. So I guess, best case scenario, do you expect things to follow a similar route?
Well, although I could maybe speak for all of us that we hope that it will improve.
Of course, yeah.
However, the situation is evolving very quickly every day, and it really depends on how quickly the spread can be controlled. So even during SARS, as you had pointed out, we did not really enter negative territory in terms of GDP. It was only back in 2001 that we had the previous recession, and that was largely driven by the dot-com bust. Yeah.
Right. So for people like you and me, the average person, what do we need to prepare for in light of a possible recession? Are we going to see job cuts, layoffs?
Well, the good news is we haven't really seen right now any reports of layoffs. In fact, we did see some private sector companies stepping up to offer, funds or assistance to help the smaller companies tide over this rough patch. Much will also perhaps depend on, the upcoming budget statement and the kind of help that it can give to Singaporeans.
Speaking of, the budget statement is tomorrow, and Finance Minister Heng Swee Keat already said that we can expect a cost of living package, tax rebates. So in light of this downgrade, do you think we can expect further reassurance from Minister Heng tomorrow?
Much attention, I believe, on the budget would really, people want to see, what the budget can give in terms of supporting Singaporeans and Singapore companies. Although the coronavirus outbreak would be, foremost in many people's minds, the budget should also have a longer term, outlook to bolster our economy, for many years ahead, and not just this road bump. So we do look forward to the budget tomorrow.
All right, let's see what happens. Thanks, Chian Hui. That was Deputy Business Editor Poon Chian Hui speaking about the downgrading of Singapore's growth forecast for 2020 to between negative 0.5 to 1.5%. And you can read all about it at straitstimes.com. Now, the number of coronavirus cases in Singapore has grown to 75, with 3 new confirmed cases yesterday. 2 of the new cases are linked to the Grace Assembly of God Church. One of them is a 43-year-old regular serviceman in the Singapore Armed Forces. The church is now the biggest cluster with 18 confirmed cases. Of the 75 patients here, 19 have recovered. Most of the rest are stable or improving, but 5 are in critical condition. Meanwhile, the death toll from the coronavirus outbreak in mainland China is now more than 1,770, up by 105 from the previous day. There were over 2,000 new cases reported in China yesterday, putting the total number of infections to over 70,400. Nearly 90% of the new cases were in Wuhan. But the number of new cases in Hubei province had been declining since a large spike last week when officials changed their criteria for counting cases to include people diagnosed through lung imaging. Elizabeth Law, China correspondent for the Straits Times. Good to have you back, Liz.
Hi, Olivia.
Hi. Well, so Liz, the head of the Le Shenshan Hospital in Hubei said that the virus has reached a turning point with a dip in the number of severely ill patients. Do you think that's really the case, though?
Well, I think we should be very careful when looking at numbers like this for a couple of reasons. Well, number one is that even though, yes, there has been a dip in the number of severely ill patients, we bear in mind the fact is that there are still new infections every day, there are still new deaths. So I think we should be wary of saying that the virus has reached a dip. And this also comes, just as the WHO has said, it is very hard to predict the future of this virus. And so this is something that we just have to bear in mind as well. And lastly, I think as I've said before last time I was up here, I said that Chinese officials have been reporting a dip in cases throughout mainland China except for Hubei province. And so we have to be mindful that, in a country where things depend a lot on this sort of number, this sort of quantitative numbers as a benchmark of performance, and we all know what happened in Hebei province before this whole outbreak really exploded. So we just have to be very mindful whether or not how clean this data that we're looking at is.
Right. Well, in Beijing, it said that all returning to the capital city will have to quarantine themselves for 14 days, while Hubei province has banned vehicles from traveling on the roads. Do you think these measures may be a bit too drastic?
Well, it is quite drastic. It is very severe. But the thing is that, in China, they are really quite fond of the big gestures, and because it is just such a large country, this is necessary. Now, let's talk about these two places. Maybe first, let's talk about Hubei province, because this is the epicenter of the outbreak. We saw Wuhan city getting locked down, unprecedented in the world. After that, more cities around Wuhan, same thing happened, and people were banned from leaving their houses. So what difference is this from what has been going on since January 2020, 1st. I beg your pardon, January 23rd. So what is different now is that previously people were allowed to still use their delivery apps and order food, order groceries to their homes. Or people, if you wanted to, you could still go out in your car and go to the nearby market, go to a supermarket to try and buy food. But with these new measures, it just means that unless you are in charge of essential services like medicine, medical services, ambulances, or you were a specialized delivery person, you will not be able to leave your house. Does this prevent even more people from going out? Yes, it does. But is this really going to help in the long run? I don't know, we can only hope for the best. Now, to go back to Beijing, why this is important for Beijing is because one of the biggest things that people were worried about was that as everyone was going back into the capital city after the Chinese New Year holidays, there was going to be a huge wave of people coming back from all over China, not just Hubei province. Now, the virus is something that has spread throughout the country, and they are worried of imported cases from the rest of the province because there's just so many people in Beijing. It's just a mega city. And so by doing this, it's really the only way possible for them to try and contain the spread of the virus, because you can't tell people you cannot come back to Beijing. This is the capital city of China. You can't ban people from coming back to work. So this is probably the best way that they can try to manage the entire situation.
Well, much of China returned to work today after an extended holiday. So what are we seeing in the country?
Well, we are seeing companies come back online. We are seeing, so what I spoke about last week was that this is probably going to be the biggest telecommuting experiment in the entire world, because this is it's just such a massive country. Well, in the lead up to this, last week we've seen editorials in various newspapers questioning whether or not how good would this entire work from home thing be. Well, we already know that in the beginning, educators, teachers and students were complaining about e-learning because firstly, the teachers aren't super used to it, unlike in Singapore where it is really a big part of the curriculum. Teachers there weren't quite used to it. So there was a report in which a teacher said, I feel like a subpar live blogger, because they were just not used to how to set up the camera and how to talk to their students. And when you can't see your students, it really is quite hard to teach. So we know that they weren't really big on e-learning, but of course it is necessary. And people were saying that, working from home, like a lot of us have been doing at the Straits Times, it is quite easy to get distracted. Or when you live with other family members, they do expect you to, hey, you're at home, why don't you help out with the housework? So those are quite a few things that I think it's kinks that the Chinese workforce has to try and iron out. And one very important thing before I go is that China has a very unique, a more traditional sort of workplace culture where they believe that you have to be there at the beck and call of your boss. You know that there is just this whole dynamic to it, which telecommuting doesn't really help. So I think that is something that will have to change if going forward they really do want to get in the age of telecommuting, and during this period as they try and overcome this outbreak.
Right. Fantastic points that you raised up, Liz. Thank you so much. I've been speaking to China correspondent for the Straits Times, Elizabeth Law. Keep up to date with the global coronavirus outbreak at straitstimes.com. Now, it's been almost a month since the Ministry of Health announced the first imported case of the coronavirus here, and Singapore has since seen the escalating of the DORSCON level to the current orange. The Straits Times initiative, Frontline Fighters, aims to give readers an insight into how Singapore is tackling the outbreak through the featuring of individuals who are leading the charge. The Straits Times has put up comprehensive behind-the-scenes coverage of the coronavirus since the outbreak here. These include special reports like All in a Day's Work for Cool-Headed Nurse, which featured nurse clinician Priscilla Fu, who works at the National Centre for Infectious Diseases. We also took an inside look into how contact tracing is done. And Keep Your Hands Clean and Carry On, 25 questions about the coronavirus answered, featured answers to commonly asked questions from the public. Well, speaking of Keep Your Hands Clean and Carry On, we are joined by none other than senior correspondent Joyce Teo, who wrote the report. Now, she's been part of the team that's been covering the coronavirus since the beginning of the outbreak. Hi, Joyce.
Hello. Hi.
Hi Joyce, this was a massive effort by the entire newsroom with several of the desks involved. So how did the idea of a special featuring the frontline fighters come about in the first place?
Okay, so I think since the outbreak started, we've had many questions from our readers on the virus itself, on the science behind it, and how to protect themselves. And then we wanted to answer all these questions. So initially, we wanted to do 101 questions actually, but I think along the way things changed. It's moving at a really fast speed. Our editor-in-chief, Warren Fernandez, and our executive editor, Sumiko Tan, decided that we should also focus on the frontline workers, the people who are, helping us battle this outbreak.
Right.
Yep, so we included that, and then it became this mega insight special.
I see. Well, Joyce, take us through the process. What needed to be coordinated, and I guess how challenging was the entire thing?
Yeah, it was very last minute, so there's a lot of work involved, a lot of people involved. We planned it quite quickly. Sumiko helmed it. We got a lot of people to go out and write the stories. I mean, she herself, went out to do an interview while coordinating the coverage as well. And then there were people behind the scenes, the supervisors, just a lot of people, sub-editors, artists, everybody working very hard on it. We went out to interview the doctors, nurses, contact tracers, just all the different people, the GPs, people who were involved in this. Yes.
Right. Well, Joyce, how does a special like this shine the spotlight on the many unsung heroes? How important is it to do something like this?
I think it's a good chance for us to tell their stories. They are working very hard. And, during SARS, these healthcare workers, they were shunned. People were very fearful. They were afraid of them.
Yep.
So I think this is a good chance. I think now it's changed. It's a good chance to tell their stories, to show how they are battling it. Because I think it also helps to shift the focus from, the fear that the public have with an unknown virus. And we're looking at how we're actually fighting this with what we already know. And then, you can see how prepared we are to actually face something like that together.
Right. Well, Joyce, for your part, you wrote an article answering 25 commonly asked questions about the coronavirus. It was part of the special. Tell us more about it. How did you choose these questions? And what was the information gathering process like?
Right. So the questions, yeah. So as I said earlier, there were like readers writing in,
Yep.
asking us about it. So we compiled those, and then we look at what some, the common questions that people want to know. Like, people are wondering whether they should wear masks as the death toll in China increases, and the fear rises. So these are some of the questions. We started gathering the information, I think, quite early on along the way, and I've have other colleagues helping me. Rita, Cheryl, we got the Liz was on this as well, and then we have got the business desk as well. Different people preparing the answers to this. Yeah, so I should say that early on I mentioned that originally we prepared 101 questions, so a lot of people
wow.
were working on it. Yeah, we're still putting that online at some point. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Joyce, for sharing more with us. If you would like to see more of ST's reports and specials, they're also available online on our website. Our video team has also been working hard with producing special reports on the coronavirus here and have recently launched a series titled Frontline Fighters. It features the daily lives of the many unsung heroes, and you can look out for that as well on the website. And those are our top stories for today. Keep up to date with news in Singapore and around the world at straitstimes.com. But before we go, news just in. A new stay-home notice will be introduced for Singapore residents and long-term pass holders returning from mainland China. They will be required to remain at home at all times for 14 days. This is according to National Development Minister Lawrence Wong earlier today. And this new scheme will take effect from tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. and apply to all returnees with recent travel history to China outside of Hubei province within the last 14 days. This new scheme replaces the
substantial number of Singaporeans, citizens, permanent residents, and long-term pass holders still in China. Right? I think at some point in time, they will want to come back to Singapore, especially after the Chinese New Year holidays. And there is a higher chance now that some of them will be infected with the virus. And that's why we have decided to introduce a new stay-at-home notice for all who are returning from China. This stay-at-home notice will be stricter than the LOA, than the leave of absence, in that we will require everyone coming back to stay at home throughout the 14-day period. So unlike the LOA, they will not be allowed to even leave their homes briefly at all. Right? They will have to stay at home strictly throughout the 14-day period, and we will apply this to all who are coming back. Singaporeans, permanent residents, long-term pass holders. We will issue them the notice when they arrive at the airport and then ensure that they immediately go back and they will comply with this new requirement. This will also cover all the workers with work permit holders or work pass holders who are returning. For these workers, we have said earlier that they already the employers are already required to seek prior approval from MUM before they return. Right, so that's already one check for such category of workers, the ones on work passes. The employers have to seek prior approval from MUM, and then when they return, they will have to serve out this 14-day requirement, either at the places that they are staying, or if the employers need help, they approach MUM and we will find them suitable dormitories where they can serve out this new stay-at-home notice. Right, so it will cover all who are coming back, and we will enforce the requirements strictly.
Well, this new scheme replaces the LOAs or leave of absence, which will no longer be issued. And we'll have all the details coming up on The Big Story, so keep tuned. And those are our top stories for today. You can stay up to date with news in Singapore and around the world at straitstimes.com. I'm Olivia Quay.